This is Jim with Twisted Hobbies. Today, we're building a Wampire.
Okay, I've got my manual. You can download it from the website with this QR code. I've got my servos, my ESC, my motor and prop, my receiver, and my foam tack. The receiver comes separate from the power combo. First, we're going to take out the surfaces that need to be folded over. So that's the wing, the rudder, and the elevator. And I'm just going to place some batteries on these and hold them there for about an hour or so. While we're doing that, I'm going to calibrate my ESC, center my servos, and verify motor direction. There is an entire video on this that is a link in the description so that you can go into more detail on that. And now we're ready to lay out the parts of the fuselage. And you can kind of see how they're going to go together. I wanted to know where I was going to put the glue, so I used a pencil to kind of trace around on the inside of these, and that gave me a good idea of where I was going to be smearing glue. And then I started putting glue down. I'm using foam tack here. I really like the way that it glues together, but you can use any adhesive that you like. Notice I've got a piece of parchment paper underneath my area, so that way I don't glue it to the table. Now we're going to need to get the servos in there, but let's get those servo horns on there first, and let's get the adjustable end links pushed through. So you can see I'm using this little jig to push those through, and I'm just cutting open the tabs so that the servos can push down flush inside of there. Do that to the other side as well. And then we can attach the servo horns before those get glued in. Next, we'll be cutting out all these little tabs in order to open up this area for a spar that goes down the vertical fuselage. Dry fit your spar, make sure it's in place, and then where it's going to be touching, we're able to put glue. Make sure it's flush. Then I'm going to plan out my electronics and where it's going to go. I open this up just a little bit more to give it room between the motor and the ESC so the ESC could fit in there. And then off camera I did some soldering to make the extension for the battery cable. Once all the electronics are in place and you're happy with where they're going to sit, now we can spread glue on this half of the fuselage and put the two halves together. Just make sure your servo wires are clear, make sure it all comes together evenly, and then we're going to hold it down with some weight. I'm just using batteries because that's what I've got handy. Here I'm putting on the motor mount, and then we're going to cut out the area for the battery compartment. Now I'm going to screw my motor in place, and there were no holes in the motor mount, so I had to put my own pilot holes in there. Not too big of a deal. Once I got one hole, then I screwed that in place, and then the other holes are pretty straightforward. And now we'll start with the hardware that attaches the wing. So we're going to use a few of these balsa pieces. We press this captive nut into place and then assemble it, and then we can glue the entire thing into the vertical fuselage. Then we're going to do sort of the cheeks, the sides of the plane. And here I'm just figuring out where I'm going to be placing glue. And then I repeat that process on the other side. And then we're going to start with the canopy. The instructions don't show a whole lot of detail on the canopy, so I started with this black piece, put it along that long side. I had to bend it just a little bit. And then we're going to put the white piece in there. It goes kind of in at an angle. And then you sandwich it together with the other piece. Checking for fit, make sure everything's good before it dries up. And then we'll put these little two two teeth in, little tabs that kind of stick into the top part of it. And then we'll find the magnet, and then the magnet will get glued onto the front of it. And then the next thing we're going to do is start on our pushrod guide. First thing I do is I cut a little slit where it's going to start at the tail of the plane. I figure out where I want it to run. I cut it apart. You could probably cut a slot that goes all the way, but it's fine just to leave it on the outside and glue it in place. Then I'm going to do a dry fit on the horizontal stabilizer, and it turned out that it was getting held up a little bit, so I had to shave some off. That looked great. Then we're going to apply some glue, and then apply glue to the vertical stabilizer, and then make sure they're at 90 degrees. Then we're going to find our control horns in the hardware bag, and we're going to install those. We dry fit them in place. The little hole should be over the line for the elevator. But I would recommend holding off on installing these until you're working with your push rod, because it's going to be a lot easier to get it in place. So hold off on this step until later. Now I'm laying out where I'm going to be gluing my pushrod guide. I'm just lining it up with the servo and with the control horn. Next up, we're going to get out our pushrod, and now you can see where I should have waited, because now I have to feed that through, kind of funny. So I would recommend not gluing those control horns in until after it gets installed. It wasn't too big of a deal, but it was enough that I would do it differently if I did it again. Okay, so I cut those to length, and then I tighten up the adjustable end links. And now we are ready to move on to the wing. I dry fit the spar in place. I spread some foam tack in there. And then we make sure it's flush with the wing. Then I set up the dihedral guide. I would recommend gluing that together. Grab the wing tips and put them into place, using that dihedral guide to keep it at the correct angle. While that one's drying, let's put together the part that the screw goes through, and then we'll work on the nose of the plane. It uses these two pieces and then squeezes together. I found that just holding it together is the best way. Then we'll work on the other wingtip. Then we'll stuff the electronics into place, get it all neat and tidy, figure out where we're going to mount the screw that the magnet is going to use. And then I hooked up the receiver and tucked away all the wires. Now for the servos that go into the wing. If you sort of press the servo down on top of where you want it to go, then you can use a little indentations to cut the slots for the tabs on the servo. I had to open up the holes for the control horns on the ailerons. And we need to assemble the adjustable end links that go on the servo horns, which I'm doing right there. Once those are installed, we can glue those into place. Then once the push rods are in, we can glue those control horns into place. Now we're ready to install the wing onto the plane. I had to use a Y connector for my servos. And I was able to get that wing screwed into there. Then I organized the wiring, buttoned it up, and we are ready to fly the plane.